thank you, Sam Sachs, for filling in for me a couple days last week. We were in La Jolla, California well, I flew out on Wednesday. On Thursday, we spent the day interviewing Dr. Peter Wadhams, who's the world's leading expert on sea ice and is very concerned about the ice melting in the Arctic, converting the reflective nature of ice and snow, the white ice and snow, into the absorptive dark blue open ocean. This is called loss of albedo. Albedo is the reflectivity. And his concern, what he told me on camera in the interview, was this is for this documentary that we're doing on climate change that'll be out probably early next spring. What he told me is that he thinks that the loss of albedo over the next few years, once the Arctic goes ice-free, could equal 50% of all carbon emissions on Earth. So even if we stopped all the carbon, what do we do about that? I mean, this is, and you know, scientists are just like constantly discovering more and more stuff. And in the midst of this, of course, Donald Trump won't even talk about whether he thinks climate change is a hoax. His employees, his staff apparently don't know. It's downright bizarre. And there's you know, I want to talk in this first hour about the power of ideas. The Renaissance, an idea, right? Like it was an idea that came about as a result of arguably the Black Plague, but you know, the death of a third of the people in Europe. But it led to a new way of thinking about the world. 100 years later, or thereabouts, 130 years later, the Enlightenment came about, and you know, with from Hobbes to Rousseau to Locke, and to Jefferson. Christianity was an idea, by and large. The Crusades, manifest destiny. I mean, look at how, you know, we use manifest destiny as the rationale to commit genocide against the Native American people. You know, an entire group or race of people, for lack of a better word, I'm uncomfortable with that word in such a context, but it was a genocide. So, you know, I suppose it's appropriate. White supremacy, you know, an idea. Nazism, Wahhabism. Right now, you've got the Gulf states. 2 weeks ago, four of the Gulf states blocked Qatar. They blocked Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is the news channel that comes out of Qatar, and Al Jazeera is famously independent. And these guys don't like independence. And now they're saying that Qatar is like in bed with Iran or something. I think it's just, I think they're objecting to their reporting, frankly. But to the idea of ideas and the impact of ideas to change the world, the core idea that has corrupted, you know, the core idea that corrupted Christianity in the 11th century was the idea that Christianity had to be a militant and military force, and that led to the Crusades, right? This was Pope Urban, as I recall, and you know, off we go, right? Let's turn into a military force. The corrupting idea in Islam right now appears to be Wahhabism and the variations that have come out of it. These are ideas that came out of Saudi Arabia, starting about 100 years ago, and amplified over generations. And now Saudi Arabia is exporting this stuff all over the world, and we're pretty flipped out about it. And it looks to me like Donald Trump is doing everything he can to provoke an attack here in the United States. I mean, the way he's talking, the way he's responding to the London attack. There's a historian by the name of Timothy Snyder. And Chauncey DeVega wrote a great piece in Salon magazine on May 1st. This was, a little more than a month ago. But I think it's still worth paying attention to. He said it's pretty much inevitable that Trump will try to stage a coup and overthrow democracy. He's waiting for his Reichstag moment. Now, the Reichstag moment for Hitler, of course, was when Marius van der Lubbe burned, a mentally ill Dutch communist, young man, snuck into the building in the night by apparently Hitler's Nazi buddies, and he set a bunch of tapestries on fire, and it burned down the German parliament building. And this Hitler used as the excuse to seize power, to consolidate power, to end democracy in Germany. And it began the rise of Nazism. Is Trump waiting for something like this? Is he looking for something like this? In the meantime, you've got this bizarre idea that the private sector can always do things better than the public sector. Well, there are times when you want the private sector doing things better than, in a different way than the public sector for a different outcome, right? I would much rather have, several companies competing to make my blue jeans than buy them from a government manufacturer, in a government factory. That didn't work out so well in a lot of communist countries. It just, didn't work out well. On the other hand, air traffic control, talk about natural monopolies. We always go back to this. The commons are the appropriate province of government. And there's only one air traffic control system. And so we're going to privatize that, which means it's going to cost 85% more than it costs right now, because whenever you privatize anything, you've raised the costs by an average of about 80%. Look at what's happened to our military budget since Reagan started privatizing it. And it's just massively exploded. And Trump wants to now privatize the air traffic control system. So, Flight 194, please hold on, I've got to close a pop-up. Flight, you get the, I can't do the lady's voice who sounds like, the woman who answers, she's a voice artist who does, all the airlines and everybody else. But, press 1 to speak to a controller. Press 2 to talk to one of our stockbrokers about purchasing some marvelous stock in our new privatized air traffic control system. Press 3 if you want to complain. We will connect you with our PR department. Is this what pilots are going to be dealing with? Trump said he was going to give us infrastructure, $1 trillion worth of infrastructure. Instead, he goes to Saudi Arabia. They give $20 billion to BlackRock, to a bank owned by a guy who is in Trump's administration, and he's supposed to use that to privatize things like what? To buy our air traffic control system so he can make a profit on it? What kind of sick, twisted logic is this? So we've got a bunch of really toxic ideas out there, from Wahhabism to the ways to overthrow democracy, to privatization. And then there are some healthy ideas out there, too. There's the idea of democracy. There's the idea of a representative democracy. There's the idea of pushing back on our Supreme Court and saying money is not the same thing as speech, and corporations are not people and do not have human rights. There's the idea of egalitarianism. There's the idea that it's absurd, it's obscene, that half of America is dying broke right now, and half of America, and it's probably pretty much the same half, only not as old, literally cannot withstand the shock of a $1,000 financial crisis. Car breaking down, somebody gets sick, whatever. $1,000 is enough to throw half of America into crisis. And yet we have more wealth inequality in this country than our billionaires are richer than they've ever been in history. And our middle class is shrinking below where it was. It's starting to approach below where it was in the 1950s. Reaganism has really and truly reversed the New Deal, which was, of course, their stated goal all along. $7.5 trillion have been transferred from the working people of this country in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. $7.5 trillion transferred from you and me to the top 1%. And really probably the top 1/100th of 1%. Just a few 100,000 families. And they're richer than the kings of old, richer than the pharaohs, richer than anybody has ever been in the history of the world. And now they're reaching out to politicians and buying them and saying, oh, yeah, you don't want to let us import drugs from Canada. You don't want to, you don't want to go along with the people that have clean air and clean water. I mean, it just goes on and on. The power of these ideas and the corporatists, I don't even want to call them conservatives anymore. The corporatists figured this out. Lewis Powell in 1971 with his memo, they figured this out. We've got to get control of the press. We've got to get control of our schools, both elementary and secondary, and by the way, privatize them if possible. We've got to get control of Congress. We've got to own members of Congress. We've got to get, we've got to take over, basically, take over the country. And they did it. They did it successfully. And part of it was because Lewis Powell in 1976, he wrote his memo in 71. Nixon put him on the Supreme Court in 72. In 76, he authored the Buckley versus Vallejo decision that said, yeah, money is free speech. You can buy all the politicians you want if you're rich. And suddenly the rich people took over the country in the late 70s and early 80s. And here we are. It's really an amazing mixture